Before I launch right into my sermon, I just want to acknowledge it's Reformation Day. I realize I don't talk about that in my sermon, but today if you're wondering why there's so much red, today we're celebrating the anniversary of Martin Luther putting the 95 Theses on the door of the church at Wittenberg, starting the Protestant Reformation, which of course is a big day in the history of the Lutheran Church, but also a big day in the celebration of the life of the church in general too. So today we celebrate that and give thanks for all of the contributions of all the great reformers and thinkers that have come in the last 500 years. But I do want to, for our sermon, turn us back to the text that Agnar's just read for us. And if you got lost in the details of that text, don't worry, you're forgiven. There was a lot in there. But in our Old Testament story today, we heard about Solomon's dedication of the temple that they built. In short, what was described to us was a big party. King Solomon and the Israelites just finished building the temple of the Lord, and this temple is going to be the center of ancient Israelite religion from now on. So to celebrate this historic moment, they invite everybody, and I mean everybody, to Jerusalem. The rich and the poor gathered together, the great and the small, they all gather together. They have the biggest feast imaginable, countless animals they eat together. And in this celebration, they bring in all their holiest of relics. We heard the Ark of the Covenant and the Tent of Meeting and all these things that if you read through the Old Testament, you hear them talking about these relics. So they're bringing all of the most important artifacts of their religion into this one place for this big celebration and worship. And this is a celebration of everything that God has done in the history of the Israelites up to this point. God delivered them from Egypt, guided them through the desert, and after being at war for far too long, the Israelites finally have peace and prosperity in the land that God promised to them. So they're celebrating all of that and giving thanks to God at this temple. And now, interestingly, at the end of our story, after we hear the description of this big celebration, King Solomon says to God, "I have built you an exalted house, a place for you to dwell forever." Which makes me wonder, where does God dwell? Now that might seem like a silly question to ask, but I'm asking it very seriously. Where does God live? Or more simply, where is God? It's tempting to just say, well, God is everywhere and move on, and that's true. I'm not denying that. But if we look carefully at what our ancestors in the faith tell us, they thought really deeply about this question, and it shows us some amazing things because God chooses over and over again to dwell in very intimate places with us. So let's explore that a little bit. Before the story that we read today from 1 Kings, we read that God used to live in a tent. Kind of strange, but it's not a joke. After God liberated the Israelites from slavery in Egypt, God commanded the Israelites to build the tabernacle, if you've heard that word before. And it was literally just a big tent for God to live in. So as the people wandered around the wilderness, the glory of the Lord would lead them in a pillar of cloud or fire and show the Israelites where to go. And then when God stopped, the people would pitch the tabernacle, and God would enter it, and the people would camp around it. So where does God dwell? Not way off in the distant heavens, but literally right in the middle of the camp. Right in the middle of the people, amidst the people. Wherever they traveled to, God was right there in the middle of them. So when God's people are on the move, God is on the move with them, alongside them. Fast forward then to our story for 1 Kings, and it's the golden age of Israel. The land that was promised to the Israelites is there at last. And so they finally have a permanent home in the land that was promised to them. So what do the Israelites do? They build this temple, a permanent home for God, right in the middle of their city. That's what the temple is. It's a house for God. And at the end of the big party that we read about, God shows up. As Agnar's read to us at the end of that story, when the priests came out of the holy place, a cloud filled the house of the Lord. The glory of the Lord filled the house of the Lord. So where does God dwell in this story? Where does God live? God dwells in a temple, a house, right alongside his people in Jerusalem. So now that the people are rooted in one place, finally, after all these years, God roots himself right among the people. And interestingly, though, right after this text, we didn't get to read this, but King Solomon says a big prayer, and he says something very profound in it. So after building this temple that he says is a house for God to dwell in, King Solomon says, "But will God really dwell on earth? The heavens, even the highest heavens, cannot contain you. How much less this temple that I have built?" In other words, Solomon is saying, yes, God, you live in this temple right here with us. But you can't be contained by this temple. You're so much bigger than that. How amazing that a God so big that he cannot be contained would still choose to enter into this teeny tiny temple anyway in order to dwell with his people, to live right among his people. Now let's fast forward again. Sorry, I know this is a lot. But let's fast forward again about 1,000 years when Jesus comes into the world where God chooses to dwell. It gets even more intimate. You've heard this one. This is the very first verses of the Gospel of John. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. And the Word became flesh and dwelt among us. God dwells among us. And that word dwelt there, in the Greek, the word they use is literally tented. And the word became flesh and tented among us. This is directly referencing the tabernacle, the tent that God lived in, right in the middle of the people. And so even in the New Testament, God is tenting among us. Think of what that means for us, that God chooses to live right in the midst of us. And then in the gospel story that I read a little bit earlier in chapter 2, Jesus says, "Destroy this temple, and in 3 days I will raise it up." And then John adds, but he was speaking of the temple of his body. The temple of Jesus' body? So if the temple, as we heard in the story, is this dwelling place for God, it's the place where God lives, and if Jesus' body is the temple, then in Jesus, God's permanent dwelling place, God's home, becomes a human body. Where does God dwell? Where is God? In a human body, in Jesus, who comes right alongside us, in Jesus' body, which is given to us in communion. And the Apostle Paul takes it one step further and writes, "Do you not know that your body is a temple of the Holy Spirit within you?" God doesn't just dwell among humans. God dwells in humans. God dwells in you, and God dwells in me. So where is God? As the ancient Israelites and Judeans understood it, God dwells among us, alongside us, and within us. Sure, we could just say, yeah, God's everywhere. But did you notice how intimate those words are? That God is among us, alongside us, within us. This is a relational thing. It's intimate, it's personal, it's God coming into our very human places. This is not a God that's far off and distant. This is a God that won't leave us alone. When the Israelites were lost in the wilderness, he dwelt alongside them. When we were dead in sin, God dwelt as a human being among us in Jesus. And even in the life of our community here, back a few months ago when a school bus hit the playground at this very church, God did not leave us alone. He dwelt in this community. God did not leave us alone. Our God, whom not even the highest heaven can contain, as King Solomon said. This God cares so much about humankind that again and again he chooses to live right alongside us, right among this people, in this very place, and even in us, in you and in me. Thanks be to God.